Hello YouTube, it's Zion here with Hobbies of Man once again, and today we are doing another light novel review. So today we're going to be reviewing the Saga of Tanya the Evil, Volume 1, whose author is Carlo Zen, and that is illustrated by Shinobu Shinotsuki. This is published by Yen Press, as you guys can see right there. Here's what the book looks like. And the demographic is seinen, based on the fact that the manga is a seinen. So we can kind of say, hey, if the manga is seinen, this is also seinen, which is how I kind of decide what demographic light novels are usually. And the genres here are isekai, fantasy, and military, like military fiction. But we can also just say that this is historical fantasy as well, because the world that they're in and the kind of major military stuff that's happening is basically like World War One, maybe World War Two. I'm not exactly sure. But I think it's World War One. We're following like the German group, or like whatever is the equivalent to Germany in this fantasy world, or maybe Germany, Austria. But basically, we're following this like fantasy version of Germany as they're in a global war that is slowly going to be turning into a world war. And I think it is World War One that is being reflected here, but I'm not exactly sure. So if I'm wrong, please let me know down in the comments. And in terms of adaptation, this has a manga and an anime, and I've heard both are pretty good. I haven't really watched or read the other two adaptations, so I'm not really sure, but this light novel is pretty great. So definitely check it out in whatever preferred medium you like. And the premise here is basically that there's this man who happens to have a very pragmatic, bordering on cynical, and very individualistic kind of take on the world and society, and dies. And then he has to basically meet God, who he dubs being X because he doesn't believe in God. And they have a conversation, and God is like, why does no one believe in us anymore? And in God, but also in like all of the deities that this God is friends with. And, you know, the atheist is like, well, because your system of worship is like bad or whatever. He kind of like tells him, hey, this isn't how you would run like a tight ship if this was a business, because the main character happened to be a businessman beforehand. And God is kind of offended by this because it's like worshiping God is easy. You just have to believe. Right? And the man is like, maybe, but it's not that important to most people. And so, you know, being X, God is mad at this guy. And so in order to punish him and try to make him become a believer, he isekais this atheist to a world at war in the body of a little girl who happens to have magic. So she is immediately drafted into the military, basically from birth, essentially, because wizards are a very important aspect of the military in these fantasy world that, you know, our character got isekai'd to. And it's a very interesting novel, very interesting kind of idea. However, it does get bogged down in philosophy and military and business kind of oriented politics and what's it called? Like leadership structures and stuff like that. So it reads a lot like a textbook. If you're not really interested in that, and you don't really like your fantasy to feel very like exploratory of real world things, maybe this isn't for you. However, I think that it is still pretty interesting. It follows a very interesting protagonist, and it has a lot of like interesting stuff happening in it. So I definitely think that it is viable for a lot of people. It might just be that the book itself, the way it's written, is just a little tough if you're not used to reading like epic fantasy or kind of more like historical fiction type novels, because it does kind of delve into explaining, you know, like the military process and like how good businesses have to be run and how that is applicable to living your life and living like in the military and stuff like that. So it might not be for everyone, but the story itself is pretty interesting once you get past that. So the plot line here is actually quite good. It is slow and steady, but it does get really good once you kind of get into the rhythm of reading it. And it does kind of take a little bit of time to get there, so, you know, be aware of that. But it is good, I promise. It is pretty interesting. There's a lot of military politics and some really great battles. Like the way that action flows is pretty interesting. most of the time we're only following Tanya, who's the main character, who is the name of the girl that our main character reincarnated in. And she is basically non-existent as an individual, and her like self has been supplanted by the main character, or basically the main character exists as this little girl, but he kind of doesn't want to believe this, and he kind of is upset at it, so he kind of tries to separate himself from Tanya. And you notice this by the way he addresses himself and how he addresses Tanya. However, by the end of the book, this kind of stops. He like merges, and I think it's subconscious. I'm sure that it'll eventually be brought up in volume 2 that he's like, oh, I have assembled, or I have like, absorbed my two identities into one now. And so he'll just continue to refer to himself and to Tanya as one person. But we usually follow their perspective, and this usually means that they're kind of in the thick of something, because Tanya is the main character, and she also happens to be a very distinguished character in the story. So she kind of has to do stuff, and starts with a big battle where she's kind of like the only person able to provide air support at that time and place. And so we get to see her basically having to outrun and outmatch these like military wizards that are chasing after her. And then there's another time where she's part of the research and development of the military. They're trying to develop this new calculation orb, which is the kind of technological aspect that allows wizards in this world to access their magic quickly and efficiently, specifically for military purposes. And then we get to see her being a leader in training a squad of other military kind of personnel in order to be like a kind of a blitzkrieg kind of unit, a very kind of powerful shock trooper type of unit. And it's very fun, actually. I really liked it. I personally liked the political and kind of like introspective stuff just as much as the action, like shonen-esque kind of things. However, I definitely understand that it's not for everyone, so, be aware of that going into this book. If you're not interested by the halfway point, it might just not be for you. Might as well move on, because it is kind of a tough read. It is very dense compared to a lot of other light novels. In terms of characters, we basically just have Being X, who is a god character, and who basically doesn't really do much after the initial isekai phase of the story, but we get to see every once in a while kind of attempting to turn Tanya into a believer. And then, of course, Tanya herself. And again, like I mentioned, Tanya has this kind of weird split personality thing where on one hand, she firmly believes that she is the man from Earth, and also distinguishes himself as a man from the person Tanya, although he doesn't understand that he is himself Tanya until near the end of the book, where it kind of like the division between them two stops to kind of exist, or at least I didn't notice it anymore. And I'm sure that that's going to come up in later volumes. Like I said, he's just going to be like, oh, I assimilated Tanya into myself, and now I am Tanya. And she's interesting because she was an orphan, and she's called the Fairy of the Battlefield or something like that because she's a little girl. And she flies around, which I think is pretty interesting. And basically, she was conscripted into the military because she has wizarding powers, and because the mind of Tanya is that of a very self-controlled, kind of very adult person. Her magic works better than everyone else's because she's basically very well mentally trained. This allows Tanya to have like a very important kind of power for her military organization. And so she's drafted, and then she becomes a very important character in the military, specifically for the wizarding branch of the military. And other than that, there really isn't any other important character. Tanya also basically realizes that, hey, this is basically World War One, and through that she can extrapolate a lot of information that she knows. And then she meets with this like military general, and they share some information with each other. And the general's like, oh shit, we're going to World War. And then he gets Tanya to help him create this like special military branch that is supposed to be like shock troopers, like I mentioned in the plot line. And that's basically what happens there with the characters as well. In terms of world building, like I said, it's basically World War One Europe with magic, and the way stuff is divided is slightly different. Like all the Scandinavian countries are basically one country instead of four. And you know, like England is its own country as well, and France and Spain are their own countries. But like the way the hierarchy of all of the people in charge and stuff like that is kind of organized slightly different, and the magic is kind of complex. It's actually difficult to understand how it works. Basically, they have internal magic, and the way the magic works is through mathematics. And in order to do this quickly and efficiently, they have to have these orbs that help them calculate, which are basically like handheld computers that they carry with them, push the magic through it, and then it allows them to do multiple actions at once. Because basically, as far as I understand it, a wizard wouldn't be able to fly and shoot without the calculation orb. They would only be able to do one or the other. So there's this whole thing where Tanya is trying to create an orb that allows for more spells to be added at one time in order to have much more kind of ability for each wizard, right? But it's kind of hard. Yeah, good military stuff and organization crap that, you know, maybe a lot of people don't care about, but, you know, military history junkies might really like. I'm not one of those personally, but I do find it interesting to learn about it anyways, because I just enjoy, you know, learning about stuff. And yeah, in terms of artwork, I think it's really good. It's kind of savage. Like, it has a very kind of rough but kind of sketchy vibe to it that also has this very interesting kind of strength to it, I guess. I don't know how to describe it. But there's some scenes here where Tanya is, like, going crazy, and they look really badass. Let me see if I can find it. Here, Tanya's about to kill this guy and, like, cut his head off. And you can see her facial expression is kind of insane. So I think the artwork is really nice. I like it a lot. And there's also these, like, chapter pages that don't really have that much artwork in them as much as they do have, like, a vignette of stuff that's going on. Let's see if I can find another one. Yeah, I think they're the same picture over and over again. It's just, like, a picture of the sky. But overall, like I said, the artwork is pretty nice. Here's Tanya in the early battle that I talked about. And here's this one I already showed you guys. Let's see if I can find the one where she's being yelled at by the military developer. Here we go. She's getting yelled at by this developer guy who happens to be like a psycho. And I think that one's my favorite. I just think the facial expressions of the characters are hilarious. So, yeah. In terms of fan service, there really isn't any. I don't think that there's any possibility of it coming up in this volume. Like, there wasn't anything that really happened that could have been like, oh, we can have fan service occur right now. I'm sure it'll happen eventually. You know, there's these female military personnel that show up and are kind of part of Tanya's unit, so they'll probably get some fan service done with them. But this specific volume does not have any, so if you're someone that doesn't really want to deal with fan service, this is a good book for that, since you don't really have to deal with it at all. In terms of a rating, this is a 4 out of 5. I thought it was really great. However, it's not a 5 out of 5 because it is kind of slow and heavy sometimes. And although I generally don't mind that since I read epic fantasy, and that's mostly how epic fantasy feels, there's a lot of information and a lot of stuff happening all the time, and you just kind of have to, like, be very attentive when you read. It's still kind of not as enjoyable to just be able to breeze through a manga, like, because they can't really provide as much information as in-depth as, you know, actual books. So it kind of is slightly less enjoyable than reading a manga, but it is still pretty good. So I liked it a lot. 4 out of 5. It's really enjoyable stuff. I definitely recommend it if you manage to, you know, be able to enjoy something that is maybe slightly drier than what you're used to, and are a fan of military operation type stuff, and don't mind this kind of like slow but steady kind of pace. If you are not okay with any of those, this is not going to be for you. This is definitely a kind of hard to get into type of series, but it is quite good once you kind of allow yourself to get into it. So that's all I got for you guys. I can't think of any similar titles because there really isn't anything in the light novel sphere that really is like this. Like not like a light novel specifically. I can't think of anything that's like this, but I'm sure that there's definitely some military fiction manga that are kind of similar to this, but I don't know any, so I can't recommend a similar title. So yeah, that's all I have for you guys today. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, please leave a like, subscribe, and comment down below. Let me know what you thought. And thank you guys very much for watching. See you guys later.